Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our August session of the Progressive Christianity Forum. Welcome to those of you here in person and to those who are participating tonight online. Now, as we gather, we pause first to acknowledge the land on which we meet, the traditional land of the Kaurna people. And we recognise Kaurna elders past and present, and we honour their deep spiritual connection to the land, their ancient wisdom grounded in care for creation and the sacred rhythms of life. As progressive Christians, seeking justice, compassion and truth, we recognise ancient wisdom and also new insights by which we reimagine a faith for our time. May this gathering tonight honour shared journeying towards a future shaped by mutual respect and by the spirit that stirs within all of life. Our presenter tonight is David McDougall. David is an Anglican priest, the Archdeacon for Mission in the Diocese of the Murray, Provincial of the Society of the Sacred Mission, a member of the Progressive Christianity Task Group, and the coordinator of Adventure Connect. Adventure Connect is a Christian charity that works towards providing meaningful recreation experiences for disadvantaged young people, such as water skiing on the Murray and holidaying on Kangaroo Island. David's academic work includes postgraduate study of trauma, resentment and forgiveness. In his presentation tonight, Dave will draw on his study of forgiveness, which is a distinguishing element of Christian teaching and the Church's practice. He will address the question, do we need to rethink forgiveness? So, thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Esmond. Thank you, everybody. It's lovely to be here, a great privilege. I want to begin by acknowledging something. Oscar Wilde said, "There's no such thing as a humble opinion." I think that's true. Every time somebody gets up to present something, they're presenting an opinion, and really it's important to be as humble as we can. There mightn't be any such thing as a humble opinion, but I'm sure there are more or less humble ways to deliver them. And so I think one of the best ways in Australia, we demand, and so we should, authenticity and humility from people who we are listening to, is to show our working out. You know, like if you were a mathematician and you were open and honest and humble, you'd show your working out. So I think it's the same is true for theologians and philosophers. So I want to sort of begin by telling you how I came to form the opinions which I'm going to deliver you. So so we don't always begin with the objective. You know, the dream of objective truth is questionable, but we should strive for objectivity instead of just going with a gut all the time, else there'd be no point in me speaking. But also I wanted to say that one of the texts that I have taken seriously is the one that Christian humanists have done for centuries, and that is the text of the subjective self. Not the subjective self just presented as, oh, this is what I feel, or I've got a funny feeling in my little toes, so blah, blah, blah. But more to say, what about human longing? What does human longing point to? And, Augustine did this. Which is why we're going to talk about God being love, trauma, forgiveness, and the hope of healing. And this is something that Augustine said way back in the 4th century. He said to God, "You've made us for yourself, you made us for a relationship with you." And he said, "That's why our hearts are restless until we find ourselves in you." So he was examining his own heart, his longings, and taking them seriously as a pointer to something else. What do we long for? We long for God. Schopenhauer, the same sort of thing. He understood that the world it's out there, but it's also something we are perceiving. So he took seriously the human experience. And I think that's a good text to have alongside the other texts. I don't think we should devalue it or demote it at all. So let's begin then by allowing ourselves to imagine generously, genuinely, that the biblical writers were tracing, however imperfectly, a trajectory towards something astonishingly profound. They were certainly not simpletons, and nor were they automatons or static scribes of doctrine, but they were journeyers, pilgrims of the human spirit, ascending gradually from the anarchic, thontic and raw early instincts of agriculture, war, justice and revenge, but their vision wasn't fixed. It was evolving, stretching, reaching. Spong would call it, the Bible, a text under travail, a text in travail, working towards something and out of something. Always animated by an expectancy, a hope, an irrepressible hope, in fact. And if you look at the themes of Scripture, a remarkable questioning of violence. Yes, there's incredible violence in Scripture, but it's questioned. And as Scripture progresses, questioned more and more. Across the centuries, their collective imagination, I'm suggesting, refined itself, slowly shedding the veils of fear and retribution, vendetta and revenge, until in the incandescent visions of a mystic named John, exiled as he was on Patmos, dreaming, luminous with grace and suffering, the truth finally seemed to him to have revealed itself on the walls of a cave. That's not a very good picture, but that's the grotto in Patmos, where supposedly John prayed as he was banished there in one of the persecutions. And there's a prayer mat on the wall there, but if you go closer, you could see the grooves in the wall where apparently for years, so they say, John pulled himself up and down from his knees as he prayed. No church, alone, solitude on a desert island, but there he found God. So there's hope for us Australians too, right? The truth finally seemed to have revealed itself to John on the walls of that cave. It was captured in just 3 quiet words. God is love. God is love. That was his idea of God. God is charity, utter unselfishness. A great theologian of the 20th century, Hans Urs von Balthasar, who saw both wars and wrote philosophy and theology of the highest calibre in Switzerland. He said, only charity is credible. I think that's a wonderful thing to say in tired late modern capitalism. Only charity is credible. Only charity, when we see it or we hear about it, is capable of cutting through the tiredness we feel in this monetised and commercialised world. Balthasar said, only charity is credible, only charity can be believed, and only charity should be believed. And what St. John said was this charity is, let's just call it God. That's our God. Not just loving, but not just capable of love, but love itself, its source, its centre, its being. And to believe in the possibility of a God like this, a God guided by John's visions or Balthazar's, is to affirm the possibility of something fragile. It's to affirm the possibility of a genuine altruism. Now, I'm not naive. I am not genuinely altruistic. No matter how many homeless kids I take on water skiing trips, because I like that too, I'm not genuinely altruistic. I don't know if any of you are. I'm not sure anyone is, really. But my mum, who's sitting over there, loves mystery novels. And Mum, if I might just take the liberty, used to skip to, sometimes get frustrated finding out the whodunit and skip to the end. Just because something's a mystery or unattainable doesn't mean that we shouldn't knock ourselves out trying. If our response to a mystery novel to say, it's all a mystery, so there's no point reading it, a mystery should call us to want to know more. And it is possible, even though it's impossible, in Augustinian terms, to know God completely. Who can do that? It's possible to know God a little bit more than we did yesterday. And that's the thrill of living, to go on, as Lewis said, higher up, further in, deeper. And the same is true of love. Nobody is a perfect lover, but it doesn't mean we should give up trying. Because if God is truly love, and we're invited to revisit everything we've assumed, and a cascade of theological and philosophical implications naturally follow. So permit me, if I may, in a talk about forgiveness, to press this a little further. For what we're speaking of here is trauma, soul damage. The damage that is done to our capacity to love or to even believe in the possibility of love, trauma. We have been told, long told, rightly in part, that it's sin or bad behaviour or selfishness or whatever you want to call it that separates us from God. But in a world such as ours, and an evening where we're invited to rethink forgiveness, I want to wonder whether trauma does not now do more to obscure the experience of love than our own personal moral failures could ever do. In other words, not just our selfishness sort of comes between us and God, but even if we do nothing wrong, other people's selfishness towards us can do our relationship with God and love enormous damage. We can be damaged by others. So this then is not merely a pastoral issue. It is theological and philosophical to the core. For if the church claims to proclaim a God who is love, then its work must centrally involve helping the traumatised recover their innocence to some degree, enough to believe again, enough to believe in love, which is to say, enough to be open to the kind of God that St. John proclaimed. And here the Christian tradition is helpful, not silent. It offers something bold and often misunderstood, for it offers the traumatised a workable and respectful practice of forgiveness. For if forgiveness is to be the healing path and not an added burden, another job to do, like pulling yourself up by your own bootlaces, then it must be articulated in a way that traumatised people can actually do. Perhaps this is where the contemporary church could do a little better. Do we need a theology, a progressive theology of forgiveness that honours the depth of injury and respects the amount of time needed for the work of healing? can we say this? No one is too broken to be reached, and no wound is too deep for grace. At my funeral, I've asked my wife to play the Paul Kelly song, I'll Meet You in the Middle of the Air. You might know it. It's his rendition of Psalm 23. The phrase there that speaks to me most is when he says, every soul will be restored. Do you want your soul restored? I'm 53. I lost a little bit of paint now. I want my soul restored. That'd be great. And I believe that we should be in the business of restoring people's souls. I want to tell you a short story. It comes from the inquiring mind of a Baptist preacher, Tony Campolo. You might know, not exactly a progressive, but a pretty good speaker. He grew up in one of those end of terrace houses, on the eastern seaboard of the United States, all linked, the Brooklyn Rows, think Neil Diamond. And as a child, he and his friends played along the corridors that ran through the tenement buildings, always avoiding one particular doorway. In there lived a particularly crotchety and aggressive older lady. And if the children were noisy in the corridor, she would come flying out and wrap them around the shins with her walking stick, really hard. And the kids knew to give her doorway a very wide berth. One day, some years later, when the teenage Tony had become a Christian, he was walking down the same corridor, instinctively, a little tense as he approached the dreaded address, when he heard the sound of sobbing coming from inside. He stopped, and his new Christian compassion urged him now inside. Trying to offer some help, some comfort, he was initially refused, the woman clutching something and angled on the couch away from him. Eventually, she softened just a little, and she turned and revealed the object she was holding so close. It was a framed picture of a beautiful young man, alabaster skin, and two young boys, one on each knee. It was a very happy picture. "Do you know who these people are?" she asked the young Tony. And by now, of course, Tony was starting to guess. There were many refugees from the Holocaust living in New York at the time. The young man, of course, was her husband, and the boys he was dandling were her two sons. Apparently, the guards at the concentration camp had forced her to stand outside the chamber and listen to their deaths. A short time later, the elderly, crotchety lady died. And when she did, Tony Campolo asked this wonderful theological question. One I think is a progressive question, because it honours a respectful listening to the traumatised. A question, if we are to hold with a God at all, and a God of love at that, simply must be asked. We're pretty sure that that lady, when she died, still nurtured in her soul a lot of anger, bitterness, and thirst for revenge. Wouldn't you? I would. That's right, isn't it? For she hadn't been cut off in traffic that morning. Someone hadn't dissed her in the street. Nor had her dignity been affronted in an argument with a friend. The injuries she had suffered had caused catastrophic emotional wounds. She was a traumatised human being. Yeah? Here's the question the young 16-year-old newly converted Tony asked. Do you think that God, when he met this woman, complete with her broken attitudes and behaviours, would hold any of that against her? No. Of course, the answer is no. Any God who would is a God I wouldn't like to meet, thank you, or serve. And if the answer is that God that we want to believe in wouldn't hold any of her bitterness against her, any of her faults against her, the corollary for the church is neither should we. That's the direct, what's what you do next with practical theology. If God doesn't do it, we shouldn't do it. That's how it works. So we shouldn't hold her anger against her. So when we meet bitter, angry people, as Robin Williams said, there's a story behind all, bad behaviour. Initially, we might say that our response to sin ought to be along the same lines as God's. Just as God has forgiven us, so we in turn ought to then simply offer that forgiveness to those who sin against us. It's kind of like paying it forward. That's kind of the rhythm of the New Testament. But forgiving others is much easier said, and it's much easier written down in the gospel than it is done. What is needed is a deeper analysis of how forgiveness actually works, so to be better informed about how we might truly forgive those who sin against us, and so that we might stop from putting forward models of forgiveness that just pile guilt onto the traumatised who can't do the impossible things we're asking them to do. Time's important. I think that time is an incredibly important dimension to consider when we think about how forgiveness works. It seems obvious to state that the greater the trauma inflicted, the more heinous the evil that is done, the longer the time will be required for forgiveness to be even possible. We cannot and simply should not expect survivors of incredible violence to forgive the next day. They will be traumatised. Many modern accounts of forgiveness owe much to the work of Bishop Joseph Butler. Now, he's from a long time ago, but I make no apologies about that. Oh yes, if forgiveness is to be a healing path and not an added burden, it must be articulated by us in a way that traumatised people can actually do. Bishop Butler said in the early 1700s, he was the Bishop of Durham, but he was also the head of philosophy at Cambridge. Wouldn't it be great if we had more philosopher and theologian bishops and leaders? I think it would be, but anyway, dear old Bishop Butler. He said, forgiveness is the forswearing of revenge. So saying I won't seek, take or fantasise about revenge, and if I catch myself doing it, I'll stop. And then the slow, careful management of resentment. So Nietzsche told us, and philosophies listen to Nietzsche more than we realise, and Western cultures listen to Nietzsche more than we realise. He said that resentment's a big problem. Resentment's a shocking attitude. It causes terrible behaviour. Well, Butler's much more compassionate to traumatised people. He says resentment is equivalent of sticking your hand on a hot plate. Yeah, it's a horrible feeling and it hurts, but it's a good little lesson on not to go back for more hand on hot plate, right? So when we resent being traumatised by somebody who's done terrible things to us, Butler says that's a God-given passion. That's his old language, a God-given affection. And he's placed it in us, and it's so repugnant to us because it's supposed to stop us going back for more. So when we preach to people who have been abused and we tell them that they need to forgive their abusers, we should not be telling them to put themselves in physical proximity to those abusers. And guess what? Neither did Jesus. Jesus didn't say, go and give your mortal enemy a great big hug and be their new best friend. He said, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. And the great news is, you can pray for somebody who's persecuting you from the other side of the world, from a safe distance. We need to be well away from people who mean us and our families and our loved ones serious harm. And the church should never recommend reconciliation with people who have not repented from their abuse. But the kinds of forgiveness that can set the victim free from endless and deepening resentments are the ones which manage resentment, it's a wound, respectfully, and just kind of pars out that the part of resentment, the temptation to seek revenge, that's the bit which we're tipping into non-Christian territory there. So, Butler's articulation of forgiveness is my presentation. He is saying, and I think it's very contemporary, he is saying all you have to do to be a Christian is not be on about revenge. That's quite difficult, but it's a lot less difficult than the whole lot of other emotional baggage the church is asking victims to do. It's just one task, just to not be on about revenge. All of the hurt, all of the resentment is natural and needs to be respectfully allowed, not condemned. People shouldn't be clapping at victims saying, come on, hurry up and get over it. All we have to do is forswear revenge and then manage the resentment one naturally feels upon serious injury, Butler's words. I'm going to leave my talk. I've got more to say, but I think it's enough. And I think it's enough. So I'll open up to questions. And certainly what I've said is not... It's a theory, and it's just a theory, and you know, forgiveness is beyond morality. It's hard stuff, and there are many things I haven't touched on, and so I offer it very tentatively. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Now, are there any questions that you would like clarified or areas that David hasn't talked about that you'd like him to? If you have a question, we'd like you to come to the microphone to ask it so that those who are watching online hear the question easily and hopefully the answer as well. So, does anybody have a question or any comment they'd like to make?
I've got this theory about things that are happening in between the Palestinians and the Netanyahu. Something like this. Understand the trauma that was inflicted on Jewish people in the Holocaust. And I also understand that sometimes those that have been abused when they're young grow up to be abusers. So my theory is Israel is now the abuser because of the trauma in the past. I suppose I'm getting around to say that I accept that the forgiveness that's been presented to us tonight is very important, but I'm having trouble coming to terms with forgiving Mr. Putin and the Israeli Prime Minister.
Thank you. Jeff, would you like to answer?
Oh, I know. Again, I think I need to be really respectful. The complete annihilation of Gaza is unspeakable. I saw I think it was the last Intifada, I saw a beautiful picture which said 1,000 words to me. It was down in Ashkelon, which is in biblical times Philistine territory. It's where they fought, the Philistines fought the Hebrews, you know, and famously they were the underdogs, and they had a little champion, young David, who had a slingshot, and he slung it at this great Goliath, and they had the Iron Age, or they had better technology or something. I think they had bronze. I can't remember my ancient history, but they had superior military technology, and they were formidable and terrifying. It was a superpower against the little people with basically weed whackers, axes and pitchforks, and David used a slingshot and felled the giant. And this picture was of a young Palestinian boy with a slingshot in Ashkelon, almost sort of pathetically, but very valiantly, whizzing it round towards an IDF tank.
Any other question or comment?
One of the things I ask myself about forgiveness is why wasn't the word, and as you've spoken about, our attitude, general attitudes in the church, why wasn't the word forgot used or forget? And I think that's in line with you. You recognise the trauma, but I also puzzle over the forgive. You give before, and I think what may be interpreted from the situation is that you put in some kind of infrastructure before the event, so that you meet more evenly and that trauma does not exist. And you can see that practiced a lot through Christian Western traditions. We gradually evolve our laws, we gradually evolve our standards, we gradually evolve our medicine, so that trauma does not exist. And for me, that's a type of forgiveness. So if you sit there and you put in clean water, that stops some of the biblical problems. If you've got clean air, you're giving leprosy. If you've got physiotherapists, you're forgiving paralysis. I think, and I probably could extend that to the modern examples, but I don't really want to do that because I think, as you say, it's too ugly at the moment, and it'll probably be in another generation or so. There'll be people who can intellectualise it and work through that, but how we put infrastructure to stop these things. So, yeah.
I really love what you've just said, and I've learnt something from what you just said. What a wonderful way to talk about, social justice reform in a progressive way. And thank you. It's very positive. I love that.
Thanks very much, David, for raising a major issue. I'm just stepping back from the major side of it in terms of the trauma, which thankfully happens to a minority, although maybe that minority is increasing, I'm not sure. But I'm just wondering, what's the place of forgiveness in a more regular situation, and how does forgiveness relate to reconciliation as well?
No, thank you. That's a very important point, and I sort of touched on it in my talk, but I could have gone into it a bit more. That, I suppose the work that I do would want to distinguish would be, and there's two camps on that, and one is that reconciliation must accompany forgiveness or is almost the same thing, and the other one is that no, the two are quite different. I don't know if you heard coming through, I was saying that you can forgive without ever reconciling with somebody. Reconciliation takes two, forgiveness takes one in my parsing of this issue, but not in everyone's. So I would say no, reconciliation is something totally different. A very desirable outcome, but it utterly dependent on cooperation from the other party, whereas forgiveness is something we can do for our enemies, according to, the attitude. So, I don't know if would you like more of an answer, or is?
Yeah, I'm interested in what you...
Yeah. So one of the problems with forgiveness is that it requires basic repentance. One of the problems with reconciliation is it requires repentance. You can't have reconciliation with the other party unless they repent. Otherwise, they're dangerous and they're going to hurt you again. Certainly, it'd be wonderful if every forgiveness event resulted in reconciliation. And certainly forgiveness is required for reconciliation to happen, but I'm not sure that reconciliation is required for forgiveness to happen, if that's what sense. Yeah. I hope that's... Yeah. That's only my reading. There are many, many scholars of forgiveness and reconciliation who say they absolutely go together. Yeah, just not the ones I was agreeing with. Thank you.
What would you say about Desmond Tutu's approach to
Glad
forgiveness?
you asked about Desmond Tutu. This little cross here I've got is called a Lesotho cross, and it was handled by blessed by Desmond Tutu many, many, many years ago. Esmond mentioned that I was the provincial of the Society of Sacred Mission. We have a Lesotho chapter, and our crosses are made. They're from horseshoe nails. There's a horseshoe nail bent around, tied together with wire pulled out of a dump, made by African boys and young people, and then strung together with a couple of washers. And it's a symbol of our order, which nurtured Desmond Tutu's spirituality and theology of anti-apartheid activism, and also of our working class roots. The Society of Sacred Mission existed to provide Anglican working class people with a way into ordained ministry in a time where the only other pathway was Oxford and Cambridge. So that's the background there. And they were a big influence on Desmond Tutu. I think Desmond Tutu would say that South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commissions were pretty much a 20th century highlight. Now, they weren't perfect, but they were pretty good. Desmond Tutu, his idea of heaven was, he came to Australia a couple of times, but once when he came to Australia, the press interviewed him, in the cynical, smart Australian press. Somebody said, Desmond Tutu, what do you think heaven will be like? The reporter not believing in heaven at all. And Desmond Tutu laughed, which is his way of buying time to think of a really smart answer. And then he said, I think heaven will be like a great big dinner party where we all have to sit next to the people God likes. And then he said, and so we better start practicing now. So you can see how what Desmond Tutu was doing is saying, whatever heaven is supposed to be like, the church should be starting to do that now. Just saying, it's all going to be fixed up then is not good enough. We are called to, on earth as in heaven, we are called to be sort of forward ambassadors of what we hope or imagine heaven might be like. So we ought to be inviting the people God likes to table fellowship, according to Tutu. And that inherently means not just the people we like, right? So forgiveness is a prerequisite for having a Tutu church. You can't have a meal with somebody you hate without forgiving them a bit, right? Or somebody you despise, or somebody whose manners you don't like, or somebody who you'd rather not be with. You must do some sort of reconciliation. You must do some sort of forgiveness. So I think that would all seem very bourgeois if it wasn't coming from Desmond Tutu, who suffered for that belief enormously at the hands of very cruel and violent people. So we can take him as a credible prophet of love.
Hi.
Are there not times when forgiveness is too big an ask? I was a prison chaplain, and I would listen to the stories from those women. Yes, they had committed crimes, but 90% of them had been abused in childhood. Yes, they'd experienced trauma which had never been dealt with. They were beginning, so the sense of that trauma was to do with devaluing, dehumanizing. So their journey was to do with beginning to revalue themselves. And then one person said, and this thing about forgiveness, he said, that for me, I've got to leave that to God. So that was part of her letting go, was to let that, and that's what Jesus said, Father, forgive them.
There are two great articulations of forgiveness in Jesus' ministry that come from his own lips. One is right at the beginning, where he says it's a great idea to forgive. Forgive your enemies, love your enemies. Yeah. Good, that's cool, Jesus. They're saying that was a great sermon. But then he had to try and do it when people were killing him, and traumatising him. And the best he could do, was ask God to forgive them. I think that's really important. Thank you for saying that. And the reason I told the story about the survivor of the Holocaust who didn't really survive, right? I mean, innocence didn't survive, did it? So the reason I told that story is because the question Tony Campolo asked is, will God hold her lack of forgiveness against her? And the answer, I saw all your heads shaking. The answer is no, of course he wouldn't. Or if he would, he's certainly a God we would not want to meet. Spong is absolutely right. Who wants to meet a God that would not forgive that woman for being bitter, for not being able to quite forgive? And I ask you, well, I ask myself, if that happened to my family, would one lifetime be enough to live that down? The answer is no. No. Who can live down that kind of horrific trauma in one lifetime? Now, here's where this is just me, and this is a very humble opinion. I actually think that's what heaven is about. I believe in heaven. And some people will say, heaven's wishful thinking. Might be, but I'm going to need it. That lady certainly will need it, So maybe, this lifetime is not enough to digest the horrific childhood traumas that have been inflicted on people who then go and commit crimes and all of that. But I think in God's economy, and therefore the one that we should be saying is the one that matters, there's always enough time. I believe that. You don't have to, but I do. I believe that. Desmond Tutu believed that.
Do we have any other questions?
Talking of Desmond Tutu reminded me of something Dom Helder Camara, the theologian from Recife in Brazil, said once. He said, when I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. And I wondered how that why question, which is a really important question in many things, how the why relates to forgiveness. Yeah. Are we forgiving only because God is prepared to forgive us? Is there another why about this?
Could you explain that a bit more? So, because I don't want to blunder around with that,
well,
but you're saying that's a great
question. It's a question of when we ask why about something, in this case, why should we forgive people who... I really liked what you said about reconciliation and forgiveness, that they're not the same things, that you need two people to be reconciled, but you only need one person to forgive. but how is forgiveness related to that question of why should we forgive?
Oh, that's a great question.
Is it? I'm not.
That's a magnificent question. Jesus' answer to why we should forgive is because we're forgiven ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah, that was his answer. And then I would go further and say the lifestyle of somebody who feels forgiven is much freer than somebody who doesn't, or who feels they've earned or merit. You know, think of the older brother in the prodigal son. You know, he's actually quite aggrieved, and he's actually been done a terrible injustice, but he also feels he's earned everything he's got, and he's miserable. So it's much freer to live as a forgiven person. And one of the tragedies of being traumatised is it's much harder to, because you're not going to be very conscious of your own shortcomings when the main story in your life is everyone else's. And I think that is why it is incumbent on all of us to work against structural injustice like poverty, to see it as evil. Our patron saint is Michael, and it's all very weird because he's an angel and does war stuff. So you sort of think, how does this reconcile with a God of love? Well, I've worked away at that, and I found a Catholic prayer to St. Michael, which I adapted for Anglicans, where we don't play two saints, but with them. And it goes a bit like this. We make our prayer with St. Michael, whose holy war was to break the chains of all structural injustice that keeps human souls fast bound in the chains of misery. And I think that that is the kind of battle, if we can be bellicose at all as Christians, that we can join with a totally clear conscience, is where we do rail against injustice, structural injustice, even if they call us communists. Been called worse. And I mean, you try taking homeless kids on fantastic holidays and see what happens to you. It happens. You get called all kinds of names. And so we ought to hate. We ought to hate the things that make people miserable. That it's okay to hate that, because God hates those things. God hates those things. Yeah.
An additional question to that, you said that a forgiven person is much freer. But I wonder if a forgiving person is much freer.
Sure. Thank you, Esmond. I think that they go hand in hand. If you feel forgiven, you're more likely to forgive. It's just the way it is, you know. Like if you feel forgiven, you're more likely to... If I won the stupendous jackpot, what is it, 100 million bucks, and I went down the street and somebody pulled out a pocket knife and said, give me 50 bucks, I'd probably give them 500 bucks. You know, because I feel lucky. When you feel blessed and lucky, you're more generous. I've met a lot of people who are poor and a lot of people who are rich in my Anglican ministry. And the most generous people aren't necessarily the rich ones. The most generous people are the grateful people. And when we live as a forgiven or a grateful person, we become more forgiving. And when we're more forgiving, we're more likely to feel understand our own forgiveness as possible and so on. I want to ask you this. The Roman cross was one of the cruelest instruments ever invented by evil people, really. It is evil. You know, we've glamorised it, wear it. But for 3 centuries, the church wouldn't go near the symbol because it was like having a torture instrument around your neck, because it was a torture instrument. It was nothing godly about a cross. It was only something godly about the way Jesus occupied one. And this cross was custom designed to make you angry. It was custom designed to make you feel like a victim and break you down long before you died, so that any stoic vestige of dignity was gone, and you'd have a breakdown. You'd have an emotional, physical and spiritual breakdown before you actually died physically. That's what they were designed to do. And they hopefully designed, and the Roman hope was that that all happened in front of your mates. so that they learn a lesson about what an idiot you are and not to do the same, not to be the same kind of rebel or whatever it was. And it was pretty effective. It was a pretty effective deterrent. This Roman cross was custom designed to make you angry. And in the case of Jesus, it failed. And if you are the kind of Christian who believes that Jesus and God are kind of equivalent, Jesus reveals who God is. I'm that kind of Christian. I don't know what that means, but I take my theology from how Jesus carries himself around. So if a Roman cross, one of the cruelest and vilest acts of violation against another human being, couldn't provoke God to get angry, what makes you think that the things that you've done are going to make him lose patience with you? I'm sure you have. I've done some terrible things, but I haven't ever actually crucified somebody yet. So we can all be confident that we are forgiven by this God who wouldn't even get angry with his crucifiers.
Thank you. I think we might leave it there, and any other questions can be talked about over supper. There are a couple of notices. Perhaps I'll ask Margaret first, who's got two things she will talk about.
Thank you, Esmond, and thank you for your talk tonight. It was just wonderful to hear what you had to say about forgiveness and get us to think about it. I've just got two messages from the Effective Living Centre and from Christchurch Uniting here. One has come from Val Thomas, who's a member of our congregation, and she has organised a free presentation by Palliative Care South Australia, and it's to be followed by a question and answer time and afternoon tea. And the topics are: what is palliative care? What are the advanced care directives? What sort of things do we need to know about wills and end-of-life choices? And something also about my aged care. And this is to be held on Wednesday the 20th of August at 2 p.m. at Christchurch. Now, there's only one little notice here, but it will go onto the Effective Living Centre in Christchurch. Well, I'll ask that it goes on to the Effective Living Centre website. And so if you want to look it up, it'll be on there in a day or so. Okay? So that's the Preparing for End of Life, Wednesday the 20th of August, here at 2 p.m. And it's a free presentation. The second thing is this, and there's lots of notices about this, so pick one up, especially if you can give it to somebody else. The ELC is having a concert, and our concert is at a similar time, Sunday the 17th of August, and that's at the Church of the Trinity over at Trinity Sessions. Pick up one of these. You can look at the details on that. It's raising money for Kickstart for Kids, and Kickstart for Kids is an organisation that provides breakfasts and lunches, counselling and clothing for children who are coming in South Australia from poor families. So our Kickstart for Kids fundraising concert. Tickets are available for that, and again, they're on our Effective Living Centre website. Tonight, you can't buy a ticket from me for this concert, but if you would like to support us in some way by supporting a raffle, over supper, I've got some raffle books and the prizes that we've got for the raffle, and there are 3 prizes, a hairdressing voucher from Madam Josephine's, which is a hairdressing in the city, and it's... No, it's for women. It's worth $90, that. And there's a silk scarf also for women, so for your wife, Esmond, if you win that, and a small, very attractive little notebook. So the tickets for them are $2 for 1 ticket, or $3 for $5. Three tickets for $5. Sorry, I'm getting muddled up. And so if you would like to support us by buying a ticket, if you've got some money, or you could even use your credit card. We can use the credit card tonight to have those. So they're the 2 messages.
Thank you, Margaret. And I've got a couple as well, so this is a bit like television, ads in the breaks. Next forum in September, on the 4th, is a panel presentation on what do liturgy and worship look like from a progressive perspective. And the speakers, or the panel members, are Don Sinott, who's the chair of our Progressive Christianity Task Group, Marion Millen, a former prison chaplain, who asked the question and identified herself as a prison chaplain, and also Sarah Agnew, who's the minister here at this church. So September the 4th, come along. And one other notice, you are invited to truth-telling and listening. Glenys Coulthard, an Andermattner woman, tells her people's story, and Mike Brown tells of his pastoralist forebears' deadly encounter with First Peoples. And this is a rescheduled event, and it's to be held now on Sunday, the 24th of August, from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Unley Uniting Church, 187 Unley Road. And it's a free event which is sponsored by Pilgrim Uniting Church and the Unley Allies with First Nations peoples. So if you can recall all of those notices, you can be involved. Now, I'd like to thank David for his presentation tonight. I really appreciated his relaxed style. I didn't tell you that David came from what was a country town years ago, Gawler, and my wife was his teacher in primary school. And David's made a wonderful Anglican minister, I'm sure, but I hope he didn't get the comment that I got when I became a minister. Somebody in a country town that I came from said, "Now I do believe in miracles." But Meredith didn't have to say that about David because he was great right from the beginning in primary school. But I did like his relaxed style, his drawing us into an interest in forgiveness, and obviously the range of questions that were asked and the answers that he gave were very telling of the interest that he generated through his talk. So thank you very much, David. And one last thing, Kim gave a feedback sheet to you as you came in, or most people. We do like feedback, good, bad or indifferent, just to keep us on track. So if you'd like to make some comments or even just to circle the, like you do if you go to On the Run, circle one of the numbers and leave it on the table as you leave. And please do join